All right, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. We may have some more people joining us as we go, but welcome to everyone who's here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marina Zimnick, and I'm the Director of Engagement and Development at the Davenant Institute. So as I was saying in my email, we're hoping to do these sorts of webinars regularly going forward, but this is the first time that we've done a presidential briefing webinar. And our vision here is just to give our supporters kind of a behind the scenes look into what's going on at Davenant, what we have coming down the pipe, and just to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have, to give any input that you have about kind of where Davenant's at and where we're going. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our president, Dr. Brad Littlejohn.
All right, thank you so much, Marina. Thanks to those of you who are able to make time this evening to join us. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to kind of give you all a summary of what all has been happening with Davenant the past. I'm just going to basically focus on new developments since the beginning of the year. The hope is to do these quarterly or so future ones will kind of be able to zoom in a little bit more on what all has been happening the last quarter. And I'll give you guys a bit of a sneak peek of some of the cool things that we have coming down the pipe. Let me go ahead and I got not much for PowerPoint, but I did put together something of a PowerPoint presentation for tonight. So I'll go ahead and walk through that. So what I wanted to do for this first one is take this opportunity to kind of at least to situate things within our overall organizational mission, which I think probably all of you have a decent sense of, but I think it would be helpful to go back over it, particularly because I've been thinking about new ways of framing that mission. I'm going to actually try out on all of you guys a new way of framing what we're up to, and I'll be interested in hearing your thoughts on that in the Q&A. So just a kind of table of contents for this presentation tonight. First thing we're going to do is I'm going to go over what our 3 mission priorities are. So everything will be organized in 3s. If you enjoy the 3-point sermon, they're going to have like a bunch of 3-point sermonettes here in this presentation. So the 3 mission priorities that guide our work here at Davenant. Then we pursue these mission priorities in 3 main areas of activity. I'll summarize those. And then I'm going to drill down into those 3 areas of activity. First, looking at key developments the last 7 months. And then key upcoming projects in each of these 3 areas. And then I will conclude by identifying the top 3 organizational needs that we have going forward. And then finally open up for your questions. So first, what is our mission here at the Davenant Institute? Well, Davenant Institute retrieves the riches of classical Protestantism to renew and build up the contemporary church. That's our basic, concise mission statement. And it goes on, if you've seen our website about page, to say, in an age when the church has become progressively unmoored from its roots and unable to speak with conviction, the Davenant Institute is committed to reintegrating past and present and reintegrating word and world. So, we often talk about our mission being one of renewing Christian wisdom, renewing Christian wisdom. And what do we mean by renewing Christian wisdom? Well, it's this idea of reintegrating past and present, reintegrating word and world. And as I've been thinking about it more, there's really 3 reintegrations, again, everything in terms of 3s, but 3 reintegrations that we're trying to do at Davenant. So there's nature, that's the reintegrating word and world. History, reintegrating past and present, and culture, which is not there in the mission statement. Maybe it should be. So reintegrating faith and life. So all of these, I think, are areas in which evangelical Protestants have really struggled in the last century to hold things together that are deeply interwoven in the Christian tradition. So let's go through each of these. So first, nature, reconnecting to nature. There's a great quote from Abolition of Man. Lewis says, "Until quite modern times, all teachers and even all men believed the universe to be such that certain emotional reactions on our part could be either congruous or incongruous to it. Believed, in fact, that objects did not merely receive, but could merit our approval or disapproval, our reverence or our contempt. Can you be righteous? Asks Traherne. That's Thomas Traherne. We're actually, Davenant is just publishing a new modernization of Traherne's Christian Ethics, which Lewis considered a classic text. Can you be righteous? Asks Traherne, unless you be just in rendering to things their due esteem. All things were made to be yours, and you were made to prize them according to their value. So in this passage, what Lewis is getting at, and this is a key part of his argument, Abolition of Man, is that the world is such that certain responses to it are either correct or incorrect. There are value. We use the language of values, right? People have different values. We need to promote family values, that language has become almost entirely subjectivized, right? Values are just the things that I value. You value different things, and implicitly that's okay. Of course, I think we're losing that as a culture. In fact, that period of postmodernism may be passing, and we're entering a period of quite dogmatic values that our culture is seeking to force upon us. But traditionally, it was understood that values were not. We didn't just decide to value things a certain way. Things had a value intrinsic to them, and to know the world rightly, to think about the world rightly, to act with wisdom, was to discern the value that things actually had in themselves and to have the appropriate posture toward them. When I used to teach philosophy to freshmen, I would say that the fundamental question of philosophy is, to what extent is our knowledge a recognition of the order given in creation versus an imposition of order on creation? To what extent is it a recognition of order given in creation versus an imposition of order on creation? And the traditional Christian response is, of course, that when we know the world, that is a recognition of an order that is just given in things. It is the proper attunement of the mind to reality. And increasingly, the modern world has taught us to think that in our knowledge, we are, in fact, conforming reality to our minds. We are chopping up the world into little bits and reorganizing it and making it mean the things that we want it to mean. And ultimately, if what we want it to mean is different from how it actually looks, then we actually do. We don't just mentally chop the world up. We actually chop the world up, and we seek to reorder the world in our image. So this, I think, is the great danger of our time. And Christians have been something at a loss of how to respond to our culture's revolt against natural order. Many evangelicals, well-intentioned, unfortunately, I think, still think they've fallen into kind of subjectivist trap, and they think of like the Bible or Christian worldview as simply another grid, another framework for filtering reality through. It's a framework that we put on reality in order to yield the proper Christian answers to the questions that we're asking. So we're really still stuck within this kind of modernist framework in which there's not just an order given in the world, but we just say, well, there are many different ways of processing the world, and we happen to have the correct one because we have the kind of biblical spectacles. But what we're not really getting back to is the idea that God made us to. He created us in such a way that there is a fit between the natural world and the human experience, such that to live truly as a human being is to live in accordance with nature. And that what we first of all need to do in today's world is to recall our culture back to that. Okay, I need to go more quickly to the other ones. Okay, so history, reconnecting to history. There's a famous quote, John Henry Newman in 1845 said, "To be deep in history is to cease to be Protestant." You still hear this quote all the time. In fact, when I searched for the quote to get the date for the quote, it was some just like blog after blog after blog was quoting this, all these Catholic apologists. The same year, though, much less known, Philip Schaff wrote, "The Reformation was the greatest act of the Catholic Church." So which of these is true? Is it that the deeper you go in history, the more you understand that Protestantism is an aberration? Or is it rather the case that Protestantism, the Reformation, is a continuation, an outgrowth of the Catholic Church? The universal Christian tradition. So at the Davenant Institute, what we are trying to do is help Protestants reconnect to their history. I think Newman's quote has seemed to be true for so many, because so many Protestants are so disconnected from their history that when they do start to go deep in history, they cease to be Protestant, because they don't know, they haven't been taught to understand the deep connections between the reformational faith and what went before. Richard Hooker has a great quote on this. He says, "This same error makes others today ask us where our church lurked and in what cave of the earth it slept for hundreds of years before the birth of Martin Luther, as if we thought that Luther started a completely new church. The Church of Christ remains as it was from the beginning and will continue to the end, though not all parts in it have been equally sincere and sound." So this is the Protestant vision. The Church of Christ has been one from the beginning to the end, and the task of the Reformation is a purification reform within that one church. So at the Davenant Institute, we're trying to help Protestants that are wrestling with conversionitis, with this sense that Rome or Orthodoxy have something much deeper and richer to offer, by helping them understand not just, of course, the errors in those traditions, which we want to continue to restate, but the immense resources within our own traditions, because so often converts from Protestantism are leaving something that they've never really taken the time to get to know. That said, there are a lot of people nowadays talking about going back to the sources, and I think one thing we want to emphasize at the Davenant Institute is when we're going back to the sources, this can often become just a way of finding more fodder for the battles that we're already fighting. You have confessional Protestants that want to go back to the sources to prove that their particular confessional position is correct. But this isn't the right way to approach the sources. The sources, if approached rightly, will bite back. The sources will not always answer the questions that you're asking. They might pose questions of you that you weren't expecting. Really engaging with the sources means being willing to dialogue with them, and being willing not just to use them to fortify the positions that you already held, but to be willing to wrestle with them and grow in wisdom. So third, we're seeking to reconnect to culture. Here's a great quote from Gustav Wingren, who wrote a book called Luther on Vocation that we use for our Protestant moral theology course. So vocation belongs to this world, not to heaven. It is directed toward one's neighbor, not toward God. This is an important preliminary characteristic. In his vocation, one is not reaching up to God, but rather bends oneself down toward the world. When one does that, God's creative work is carried on. God's work of love takes form on earth, and that which is external witnesses to God's love. If we note properly how much good God bestows upon us, both through his direct creation and through all his created orders, we shall know the truth that he forgives sins. God has shown the forgiveness of sins in all his creation. So Protestantism has sometimes become inwardly focused and just focused on winning souls, right? So it's focused on building up your own soul, kind of pietistically, and then go in as much as outwardly focused. It's just about evangelizing and converting people, and it's not focused on working that faith outward in the world and showing the forgiveness of sins in all of creation. What does the forgiveness of sins mean in business, in education, in politics? And this doctrine of vocation, in which a Christian was called by God to serve and love his neighbor in many different spheres of life, this was a revolutionary part of the Reformation. Before that, the idea of vocation just meant a calling to the priesthood or a calling to a monastic order, kind of calling out of the world. So as Protestants, we understand that we're called into the world, and we have to be able to engage it with God's truth intelligently. But this can't be, I think evangelicals sometimes alternate between a sort of otherworldly withdrawal, or then when they do engage the world, it's often with a kind of ham-handedness, right? Where we just like are trying to just like force, you know, force the world to conform to our Christian values, instead of actually having the prudence and patience and wisdom to discern what's going on there, to discern what we have to learn even from unbelievers, and then what it means to creatively and sometimes cunningly apply the gospel to reforming those corrupt structures. So again, all this requires the cultivation of wisdom. So that's a kind of an overview of what Davenant is up to in broad terms as an organization, reconnecting Protestants to nature, to history, and to culture. Now, we do this through three main areas of activity you're probably familiar with. First, we are returning to the sources, mining the legacy of a mere confessional Protestantism, and creatively applying it to the needs and questions of our own age. So we have Davenant Press and our Ad Fontes magazine as the primary ways in which we do this. Second, we are reimagining theological education through our Davenant Hall program. We are refounding the medieval university for the digital frontier and seeking to translate the faith from the scholar's study to the churches and the streets. And the third thing we do is what's really absolutely foundational to the other two, is reforging the bonds of friendship. We believe that friendship is what lies at the foundation of all sustainable reforming work. And one of the things that so many Christians, I think, are desperately starved for in today's world is true friendship. And that made people, social media is both a sort of a cause and a symptom of that, right? It's a symptom. People are going out onto social media looking for friends because they can't find them in the real world, but then of course they get sucked into these kind of false communities. They're often called communities, these online communities that often have little to do with real world communities. And of course at Davenant Institute, we're trying to combine the best of both worlds. We are very much a digital enterprise that is indeed building community through online fora, but we recognize how easily that can become a substitute for real community. And so we seek wherever possible to bring people together in actual face-to-face engagement. Okay, so all of that, by way of just kind of, review, refresher for any of you who've been following Davenant for any length of time, probably fairly familiar with these things. Now I'm going to get on to some things that the key developments so far in 2023. Again, if you've been paying close attention, you may know about all these developments, but probably not, because we have a lot of things going on, and even our own staff are often like, "Oh, wow, I didn't even know that we did that," right? Because we have we're trying to improve that internal communication with staff a bit, but it's partly something to be to be proud of. We're accomplishing so much that people in different parts of the organization don't necessarily even know all the things that we are putting out. So these are just a couple of highlights, really, from each of these three areas. I'm just going to identify a few. So in the publishing, I think our biggest accomplishment this year, which we're very proud of, is the publication of the Leiden Synopsis, which came out, this was the flyers, coming spring 2023. I guess, well, in meteorological terms, it did. It came out in early June, so before June 21st, it's still spring, I suppose. Anyway, so this represents really our pivoting from just print-on-demand publishing, which is what we've done in the past for about almost 40 titles that we've put out, to traditional publishing, where we actually, have place an order. In this case, we originally placed an order for 1,000 books, 1,000 copies of this 2-volume set, so 2,000 books. We were getting so many pre-orders that we increased that to 1,500. And of those 1,500, we've already sold about 900 and are looking at the need to do a new print run at some point. So which is significant because it's also, right, this is, it's not a cheap book. I mean, our edition is way cheaper than what else is out there. There's an English and Latin edition for $443 for 3 volumes. We put out this 2-volume set for $80. Beautiful hardcovers. Got the black cloth bound with these lovely slip covers. And but yeah, we're trying to keep the cost low, but it's still a lot more expensive than most other things that we've published. So we've been very pleased by the reception. And of course, synopsis of a pure theology, you know, disputations, you know, 1 through 31. This is not the sort of thing that you would think would be a hot seller, but there is really an audience out there that is hungry for very robust early Reformed theology, and this is one of the classic texts. So we're very honored to be able to publish this. This is sort of future, but it's our open for pre-orders. This is our next publication coming out, Communicating God's Trinitarian Fullness. This is a volume by our friend Joe Rigney, recently of Bethlehem College and Seminary. And it's an exposition of Jonathan Edwards' End for Which God Created the World. So Joe Rigney is a fantastic educator and scholar in the Reformed Baptist world, and is particularly known for his work on Jonathan Edwards. So we're very excited to be able to publish this new book. We've had 2 other titles, I think, right? Yes, I think so, that have come out this year, but these are the key ones. So, okay, courses in our Davenant Hall front and our Reimagining Theological Education front. What is happening? Well, 3 things. So earlier this year, we announced a PhD partnership with Union Theological College. So Davenant Hall students will now be able to continue after their MLit. They'll be able to do a PhD in partnership with UTC, which is a major British institution in Belfast, Northern Ireland. And Davenant, they can do that with another with any faculty at UTC, but crucially, Davenant Hall faculty can now supervise those dissertations. So effectively, a student can continue on and do their PhD study under Davenant Hall supervision. We've also launched a Baptist Studies track, which is part of our MLit pastoral ministry, but you can also, students who are just wanting kind of for enrichment to get a basic grounding in the Baptist tradition can take the 6 courses in the Baptist Studies track. Now you might ask, what is the Davenant Institute doing with the Baptist Studies track? We have been asked that. Aren't you guys a Reformed operation, Reformed/Anglican operation? Well, yes, but we do have loads of Baptists coming to us. We've had quite a number of our students in our MLit program have been Reformed Baptists. So we figured, you know, if they're going to be Baptists, we might as well make them the best Baptists that they can be. So that's what our Baptist Studies track is for. So we also have 2 summer intensives that we ran this summer for the first time. We run our How to Read the Bible in the World intensive course. And this summer, for the first time, we also offered the 2nd year intensive course of Protestant Christendom. This is a photo of the students from that up on the Pisgah Ridge. We always do a hiking excursion as part of the course. And 3, I think, of the students in this picture are basically ready to graduate. They're just finishing up the requirements for their MLit. So we're going to do our first ever Davenant Hall graduation ceremony early next June. And they are just amazing students. We're really, really honored to have them, you know, take a leap of faith in studying with us, and impressed by their dedication. Okay, key developments on the community building front. So we had our 10th annual Convivium Irenicum. About 50 people gathered at Davenant House for the theme Christ in the Nations, a Protestant Theology of Statecraft. We had Eric Gregory, who's the chair of the religion department at Princeton University and a kind of a remarkable conservative scholar, kind of still hanging out in the belly of the beast of mainstream higher ed, and just had a wonderful, I mean, the great thing was he didn't just deliver his talks, he really was part of the conversation from beginning to end, and really deeply engaged and enthusiastic about being part of the community we were building there. So that was our 10th annual convivium. It was our first ever staff retreat we did right after that. So we got, we have the blessing and the curse of having people scattered all over the place, working remotely, and several of our staff had never met each other. So we got everyone together, or not quite everyone, but most people together for 3 days to kind of forge a common vision for the organization and wrestle with some of the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats that are before us. So it was really rich, fulfilling time. Also, excitingly, Joe Minnick, who of course has been with us since the beginning in some capacity or other. He is now here on site. He's here at Davenant House as a residential fellow. So he was involved with helping teach the summer programs. He's going to be doing local outreach, and we think we're really going to be able to have a much greater impact here in the upstate community with a scholar of his caliber. Okay, so that is all. Some key developments that we've had already. All these things you might already know if you'd been paying close attention. But this is stuff that you probably, I don't think, I don't think any outsiders know this stuff, or most of this stuff. So count yourselves lucky. All right. So what's coming down the pipe? So in publications, and these are just a few things. We have a lot of publications in the pipeline, but these are some I'm very excited about. So we're putting out a little book called Why Do Protestants Convert? So kind of going back to that discussion earlier about Newman and Schaff. We did a blog series on this a few years ago, which was, generated tons of traffic. I authored a series of essays with Chris Castaldo, who's a Reformed pastor and scholar in Chicago. And anyway, we'd kind of always been meaning to convert them into a book, but then we just kept not getting around to it. But anyway, that's happening. So just in time for, I think there's going to be special early release available as kind of thank you gifts for donors during the end of year giving season. And then after that, they'll open up early in the new year for general purchase. And we have for March 25th, for the Feast of the Annunciation, or the traditional date of Good Friday, we will be putting out, at long last, a translation of John Davenant's dissertation on the death of Christ, which is considered an absolute masterpiece of early modern atonement theology. Of course, our organization is named after John Davenant. People have often said, why have you never published anything by him? Well, because most of the stuff needs to be translated, and that's a lot of work. And it's not just translating; it's like citation after citation after citation, all through the fathers and the scholastics. So Mike Lynch has been working away on this project for years, and that is going to be published again in another beautiful hardcover edition, March 25th. Then sometime later next year, you've seen this picture here. These are books from the Peter Martyr Library. We are going to be putting out a brand new edition of the Peter Martyr Library. This is a set of 10 volumes that Davenant has the rights to, of translations of one of the great Protestant reformers, contemporary of Calvin's, and in some ways, in some parts of the Reformed tradition, as influential, as important as Calvin. So his works are just fantastic resources, and we're going to be putting out a new edition. I've decided, in a nod to all the classic rock fans out there, the theme of our release will be Back in Black. So originally they were published in red. We're going to be putting them out in black cloth-bound volumes. So that will be latter half of next year sometime. Okay, on the courses front, we had Nathan Johnson has joined the team as the provost. He is the dean of academics at New College Franklin. Very, very gifted educator. I mean, just the most gifted teacher I've ever seen in action, actually. and he's really gets our vision very well, and had a little bit of spare time beyond what his responsibilities at New College required of him. So he agreed to come on as provost and really help sculpt our faculty there, which again, it's like the faculty, but our teachers are all over the place. And so it takes a little more work to actually get people thinking and operating as a faculty. So that's what he's really engaged in doing right now. One of the things that he and I are working on is new certificate tracks and an MST, a Master of Studies. So right now we have our MLit, which is it's huge. It's in theory 2 years. It's really 3 years. It's basically 3 years, and 3 pretty intense years. So we had a certificate that was 36 credits, and almost nobody's done the certificate. Well, why? Because 36 credits is like there are master's degrees that are 36 credits, and so why would you do that and get something that just says certificate? Good question. So we decided we're going to basically rebrand what's currently the certificate, like in theory a 1-year full-time program, as a Master of Studies. And then we're going to create some actual certificates that are smaller, just 12 credits. And those are basically like a lot of our students are just people doing it for continuing ed, pastors for continuing ed, or educators just looking for enrichment. And they take odd courses here and there. And what we want to do is give them a kind of something to work toward, a package of related courses that they can do, but there's no way they're going to want to do the entire MLit. So we're rolling out a series of certificate options that we'll be ready to announce in the next few months. So it's a lot of the courses we're already doing, but just ways of organizing those that I think will give people more direction and also help improve student retention. So we launched, so one of the signatures of our program has been everything are live synchronous online classes. That's still going to be the heart and soul of our program, but we did want to create some recorded video lectures that are for people who can't make the live classes and want to just proceed at their own pace. We've had 2 of those launched already, one from Alistair Roberts, one from Mike Lynch, and we have 2 more. Well, we have 4 more in the works in some sense, but 2 definitely on their way within the next, hopefully, 8 months or so. One from Ryan Hurd on the essence and attributes of God, where it's a subject he's already considered like one of the premier scholars within Protestantism on this subject. And then Joe Minnick on the ways of knowing. So it should be fantastic. All right. What's new in community building or the building friendship as part of our mission? Looking at doing, instead of our 11th annual convivium, looking instead next year at doing a conference, first ever national conference, which we would likely host at a partner church in Greenville, and would be open to a much larger number of people, because every year we have to turn away a huge number of people who want to come for convivium, but we just can't fit them all here. So we're still ironing out the details on what that would look like, but we're pretty committed to making it happen, and should happen in early June. So we have lots of regional convivia still happening. We got one in Southern California in September, one in the Carolinas. It's about to be announced. We do 2 twice annually. We do these regional conferences here at Davenant House. So the fall one will be here on it's always on the theme of theology and law. This year it will be private property and Christian charity. We've got Renewing British Political Theology with Oliver O'Donovan in London in January. We've got one in conjunction with Bethlehem College and Seminary in the Twin Cities, probably in late April, and we've got some others that are tentatively planned. We're also, with Joe Minnick here, we're planning to launch some more initiatives to the local community here in upstate South Carolina. We have a lot of pastors here that are really want to plug their people into what we're doing, but have basically said, like, getting people to drive all the way up into the hills late, in at night and on the weekends is very difficult. So if you could run a program at a pub here in town, we would love to get our people there. So Joe is going to be coordinating that and hopefully rolling that out next month. All right, how am I doing for time? I was planning to spend about 40 minutes presenting to you all. Hopefully that's, it says briefing. I don't know if a briefing is supposed to be briefer than that, but anyway, that's that. This is the first one, it's a lot to cover, right? So anyway, I just want to conclude by highlighting top three needs that Davenant has. So biggest thing is right now, I think, is going to be staffing and funding our core operations. So we have the way Davenant has developed. We've often had like, here's a cool program idea. Let's create that program. We have people for it. We may have somebody who wants to donate to it, or it's got income streams from registrations or book sales or whatever. So we can do that. And we've grown up quite a number of programs, and then gradually sort of realized the hard way that to have all these programs running smoothly and well integrated, you need a strong core operations team. President, vice president, treasurer. We just hired a full-time administrator, communications director, development director, and so that has been understaffed and underfunded. And really, to make all of our programs work well, we need to invest more in that, and that's what we're really focusing on trying to do over the next year. Marina here has been a huge help on the development front, but Marina, you may know, congratulations to her, is having twins in September, so is not going to be able to be nearly as full-time. So we're going to be looking for a way to replace some of her hours. We've also just lost our communications director. We have a guy right now that's he's filling in the communications, may fill in for the development. He doesn't have enough time to do both, and we're trying to figure out the best solution there. So if you know of a talented young person who would be enthused about what we're doing, and has maybe some of the relevant skill sets, please do send them my way. We haven't formally advertised a position, partly because we're trying to figure out exactly what the optimal job description would be, but I'd be happy to talk to somebody. So we're dealing with rising costs. Everyone's dealing with rising costs from inflation, but I think we've also seen as an organization, as we had a lot of people who were very young when they started out, didn't have many commitments or families, were willing to just do things on a volunteer basis or for a very low salary, and are now at a position personally, professionally, where they want to keep working for Davenant, but they need to earn something closer to a market paycheck to keep doing that. So we've got that sort of those internal pressures of just continuing to do the same things is going to become more expensive, because of just kind of the demographics of our team. Then there's external pressures. We found as we become more high profile, we're no longer just this kind of weird rinky-dink operation. A lot more people are paying attention to us, so people are expecting more from us. So there's a higher quality threshold that we have to meet, just by virtue. It's a good problem to have, but again, it means we discover we have to sort of spend more just to do the same things that we've always done. So all this means that we need to build out a stronger and wider donor base. Now we have a lot. Our programs, as I said, are pretty well funded. They're all, they have designated donors that are giving to that thing, or they have income streams that are covering the costs. So it's really in the area of our core operations that we have a gap that we're trying to fill. So what we're looking at, just for the year ahead, is about $490,000 is what we think we need to budget to actually cover our core operating costs, which may sound like a lot, but if you actually think about all the things that Davenant does, publishing house, online university, study and retreat center, events all over the place. It's really quite extraordinary that I think that we're able to do what we are on the budget that we've allocated here. So, but it's hard to get people to give for just those kind of general needs, right? It's not very sexy to just give to the general operating budget. So everybody, would rather give to something else. And when you do fundraising asks or grant proposals, you always sort of frame it in terms of, hey, here's this cool new project we could do with this money. It's hard to tell people, well, what we really need is we need donations to pay for the administrator's salary, but we do need donations to pay for the administrator's salary. So what we're looking at is really trying to get $190,000 of new general support over the next year to make this, to kind of close this gap and make this sustainable over the long haul. Right? We have money in the bank right now. It's not. We're fine for now, but it's not a sustainable long-term situation if we have well-funded programs but underfunded operations. Here at Davenant House, we've got, unfortunately, the roofs at both Broadus House and Davenant House are kind of coming due for replacement at the same time. So we're looking at trying to raise $30,000 dedicated for that need. That's something I'm actually going to be kind of doing a dedicated drive later this month. And we have big plans here on the left. You see the garden at Davenant House. We had a whole team of students working on that during our summer program. It was really awesome to see them out there. Anyway, we have big plans for improving the garden and the landscaping in general around the property, and really taking it to the next level in terms of beauty and functionality. All that's going to cost a fair bit though, so we're kind of we're not rushing any of that, but that's certainly something we're hoping to be able to raise funds for in the next 3 years or so. The other big need I think we have is just getting the word out. So I think Davenant's mission, hope you agree, is essential for renewing the church in our time. But our reach is quite small so far, right? Not that many people even necessarily know we exist. So for instance, we have 5,300 Twitter followers. The Gospel Coalition has 295,000. Gospel Coalition has done a lot of really important work. I like to think that the work we're doing is just as important in its own way, in some ways more important. And people who do know about us, I've never really had the problem where when I explain what Davenant's about to someone, they say, "Oh, okay, well that sounds, what's the big deal?" Or they say, "Yeah, but aren't lots of other people doing that?" Like, people who get what we're doing get that it's important and valuable, and they are excited. And it's really, when I go to the Evangelical Theological Society and see the younger generation, almost everybody under 40 comes by our booth. It's like, "Oh, I love you guys. I'm so excited about the stuff you're doing." So we're really having an outsized impact in shaping future leadership. But what could we accomplish if we had 10 times the audience that we currently have? There's no reason we couldn't have 10 times the audience. If Gospel Coalition has 295,000 followers, we could have 50,000, right? So, that would obviously help build the donor network, and it would just mean that the valuable work that our scholars are doing is actually being leveraged to greater impact. So that's something that we really want to, figure out. How can we help the church more broadly? How can we plug into broader networks and help them learn about the important work that Davenant is doing? So all of these, I hope you as donors can help us with these things, both in terms of your gifts, in terms of your networks, introductions to potential new donors, introductions to key influencers and decision makers who can put us on the radar of larger Christian networks. You really, we talk about Davenant as being an army of friends. Ultimately, that's how we accomplish what we do, is through this, our commitment to one another, and you guys are all an important part of that. So thank you so much for making time this evening, and I now be happy to take any questions. Any questions? Well, oh, wait, there's someone. I hear someone unmuting.
Hey,
You go.
Brad.
Yeah.
Hey, David Browder here. I was wondering, when you're speaking with someone and they're asking about the Gospel Coalition or Modern Reformation or White Horse Inn, whatever it is, how do you personally sort of distinguish what you're doing from them?
Yeah, sure. So I think, I think that first point, that nature, history, culture triad that I'm sort of trying on for size here. I think that nature piece is really crucial. I think when I do try to tell people just a quick kind of one line response, what is Davenant Institute about? At least if it's in more academic circles, this would mean something too, or whatever I say. We're basically the group that's trying to get Protestants to think about natural law again. So I think the idea that there is, as I say, this order built into nature, that God created our minds to know it, that the morality of Scripture is not just like a divine rule book for us to follow, but that is rather an illumination of that moral order given in reality. And that all of that should serve as a sort of a norm for our Christian political action. That whole nexus of concepts, I think, is pretty foreign to most people in the Gospel Coalition crowd. The Modern Reformation crowd has done some interest in natural law retrieval, but I think it's really just sort of scratched the surface. So I'd say that's the biggest distinctive. I think the history, as I said, a lot of people are talking about retrieval theology now. But I think what we are particularly like, there's people who want to retrieve the early church fathers. A lot of people want to retrieve Thomas Aquinas. There's people who are always wanting to retrieve Protestant reformers themselves, like Luther and Calvin, big names. I'd say, and we want to retrieve all those guys. That's all part of, take courses at Davenant Hall, you'll get some of that. So I'd say our distinctive is really focused on, we put a lot of emphasis on retrieving the legacy of, say, 17th century Protestantism. Say, why 17th century Protestantism? Well, on the thesis that nothing is at its best until it grows to maturity. The Reformation is fantastic, but the Reformation takes time to grow to full maturity of expression. And so if you really want to understand what Protestant doctrine is about, don't necessarily read the first generation. I mean, do read the first generation reformers, of course, they're fantastic, but you're going to get the fullest and clearest expositions 100 years further on. And that's the point at which Protestants have kind of fully come into their own and are exercising intellectual leadership in all kinds of fields, not just theology, but philosophy, literature, law, etc. So if Protestants are going to lead the culture again today, we need to look at the period where they led the culture most successfully, and that was 17th century.
Brad, I've got a question, and maybe because I'm not as deep in the Davenant orbit as some others might be, but are there, do you see Davenant as representing the Protestant tradition generally, or maybe more the Reformed aspects of the Protestant tradition? Are there some Protestants who may not be quite as comfortable in the general Davenant setting, or not? I'm just, again,
yeah.
So I just throw that out to kind of get a feel for what kind of how broad you see
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I used the phrase, Davenant is committed to a mere confessional Protestantism. So let's first talk about the confessional piece and then the mere piece. So confessional, as distinct from a whole lot of non-denominational evangelicals who, aren't committed to any particular confession of faith, or they might have every church has its own slightly different confession of faith, or they'll say, no creed but Christ. And so they tend to be just not very theologically grounded. They're rather adrift and easily blown to and fro by every wind of doctrine, because they don't have a strong foundation stretching back through time that they're built on. So I would say, to that extent, those people are going to not non-denominational Protestantism isn't going to fit as well in the Davenant orbit. On the other hand, that's where so many people are coming from that world to Davenant's classes and publications and so on, because they recognize the need for that. The mere part, right? We're confessional. Okay, PCA is confessional, OPC is confessional, LCMS is confessional, et cetera. We are mere confessional in that we are committed to, if you hold to one of the main historic Protestant confessions, which is the Augsburg Confession, I could list a number, but I think the ones that we have in our bylaws, the Augsburg Confession, the 39 Articles, the Second Helvetic Confession, the Three Forms of Unity, which is the Belgic Confession, basically, and Heidelberg Catechism, Canons of Dort, the Westminster Confession, and the London Baptist Confession, right? If you hold to one of those, then you're good in the Davenant. You're part of the Davenant orbit, and that's because we think that the things that unite those confessional traditions are much, much greater than the things that divide them. The things that divide them are absolutely worth talking about. And if you read some of our publications or take some of our courses, you'll be part of the conversation around those points of division. But they're all framed within the common ground here is huge, and if we could just agree on these things, we'd be in fantastic shape, right? So we don't want to play up those differences. So that means that in theory, Lutherans, Reformed Baptists, Anglicans, Dutch Reformed, Presbyterian, all of those should be sort of equally at home in our orbit. The reality is Lutherans aren't so much. Lutherans kind of have their own orbits. There's a little bit of a black box that we've struggled to break into. I actually have a call with my communications director on Thursday about this very question. So, but otherwise, we've gotten a lot of traction and those other denominations that I talked about. And I would say particularly probably the most, the OPC is a small denomination, so that overlaps a lot with our circles. We have a lot of following there. Also, the Anglican Church North America is a young denomination breaking away from the Episcopal Church. Really, it doesn't have healthy institutions hardly at all, and so they're really starved for resources. So that was part of why I founded Davenant in 2013 and named it after an Anglican bishop was I wanted to create an institute that would be a resource for the emerging ACNA, and I'm always encouraged to hear how many young priests in the ACNA are following our stuff. So,
hey, Brad, I'm gonna ask you a question. You had that article on why Protestants convert.
Yep.
Was that directed towards Protestants converting to Catholicism?
Yeah, pretty much. It references Eastern Orthodoxy just a bit. Some of the things apologists apply to Eastern Orthodoxy, but it's primarily Roman Catholicism. Thanks for coming, John.
Okay, good to be here. And the other part of the question,
I was saying that to the other John who's leaving, but thanks to you too.
The question is what we're doing an either or situation, either Protestant or Catholicism? Is it that cut and dried?
No, I would say, in fact, I would say you've got some very good collaborations with Roman Catholics that to my mind, like the issue with the biggest thing is I want Protestants to know why they're Protestant, and not to jettison Protestantism because they haven't even bothered to actually acquaint themselves with it first. Because if that's the case, then they're converting for unhealthy. What happens then is, why are they becoming Catholic? They're becoming Catholic because they're running away from problems they see in their Protestant background, without usually having. And I don't want to generalize too much, but in many cases, without having really taken the time to dig into the Protestant tradition, all its depth and breadth. So they're running away from that. They're running to Rome as a solution, and what are they going to find? They're going to find all the same problems in just different forms there. And so it's the issue is not with Roman Catholicism per se, although obviously I think there are some significant issues with Roman Catholicism. I would say the issues with Roman Catholicism are significantly less than they were in many fronts. That a lot of things have been reformed. There are still some significant issues there, but in our current cultural setting, in the broad picture, they're allies on most things, right? And so the bigger issue is Protestants who go to Rome for bad reasons. But I have Roman Catholic friends who are like very enthused about what Davenant is doing, because they would basically say, look, we as Catholics can only be like, we need to sharpen one another. And if the Protestant church isn't sharp, it's not on its game, we're not going to be on our game. So
Right. Okay, great, thanks.
Brad, I had a few comments. You've answered a lot of the questions that I might have answered, might have asked. I have a background in the sciences. I'm very interested in both culture, history, and the sciences. And of course, a lot of the problems we have in culture have to do with problems we have with the modern sciences, generating a sense of conflict between religion and science, which I think is a false conflict. It can be a conflict, but I'm particularly, and I'm actually ACNA, so I'm coming out of that Anglican tradition. So I'm glad to see that just in your thinking. What I'm curious about is the philosophical tradition that goes back prior to modernity, prior to the 16th and 17th centuries. I suspect is one of the things we really need to heal some of the problems with understanding the natural world, and through the sciences in particular, going back to Aquinas and the Church Fathers, and that rich metaphysical tradition. I know Ed Fontes back last summer had the series of articles on Zach Huber's book on the metaphysics of the understanding post-Chalcedon, how we understand the humanity and divinity of Christ, and those centuries that led to quite a bit of conflict. And the church finally resolved, though, through very careful thinking philosophically about what it means to be fully human and fully divine. So resourcing the philosophical tradition prior to modernity, how does that, you're doing some of that in your classes and things. You talk about Ryan Hurd and Thomas Aquinas and so forth, but how do you see that whole resourcing the philosophical tradition of the Church Fathers fitting into Davenant's overall program? I think I have a sense of what you're trying to say, but maybe I'll look at you expand on it a little more.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I would say that philosophical renewal is a really key part of what we're doing. And back to David's question, I think another thing that I would say is a distinctive vis-a-vis some other Protestant intellectual operations out there is, and when I talk about going back to the 17th century, one of the things that's important about the 17th century is this is a period in which philosophy and theology are still deeply intertwined, and it's understood that to be literate in theology, you must be literate in philosophy, and in which, although the tides are beginning to turn in the 17th century, it's still the kind of dominant philosophical tradition is the broadly Thomistic framework of metaphysics. I use Thomistic in a kind of, again, in a broad sense. There's it's sometimes just called the great tradition or the perennial philosophy of this shared metaphysical consensus developing from Plato and Aristotle through the Stoics, and then as developed by the Church Fathers, really crystallized in the scholastic period in figures like Aquinas, and then restated really beautifully and powerfully by Richard Hooker and other great Protestant divines in the early modern period. And this really it's critical for, as a sort of a grounding, a metaphysical grounding for the idea of natural law, and therefore for this vision of morality as something that is objective and knowable and written on man's heart, and that that we can use as a kind of we can hold up to any human action and say, is that action consistent with the purposes that are intrinsic to human nature as human nature presents itself, and that if not, then it's immoral by definition, right? That all presupposes certain theological or philosophical scaffolding that's largely lost. So a lot of people trying to recover natural law now aren't necessarily realizing all the kind of framework that needs to be recovered to hold that up. But not just natural law. Something also important here is the idea of classical theism, an understanding of which is, I think, a huge challenge to the modern church. The modern church, we really tend to anthropomorphize God, and we drag God down to our level. We've kind of we think of our worship music all sort of treats God as just a friend and a buddy, and there's a lot of really bad theology that goes along with this in terms of thinking of God as basically responsive, fundamentally responsive to human needs in a way that makes him just another being like us, just a bigger, stronger version of us, right? But classical theism
Right.
says no, he's not bigger. He's not a bigger and stronger version of us. He's something completely qualitatively different. He's the ground of all being. He's infinite being, and we are finite being. He's a necessary being, and we are contingent beings. And so, yeah. Sorry, I'm getting carried away.
No.
But,
Yeah, no, what you're saying is, I think, very much along the lines of the kind of thinking that I've been doing. I mean, we need a recovery of classical theism in its sense of the ultimate, the utter transcendence of God and his being unlike us. I just submitted a little essay to Reese Laverty on Fossili Fra Advante, so he'll that covers some of this actually. So
the Ryan Hurd lecture series we're putting out, and the two lecture series that we have coming out from Ryan Hurd and Joe Minnick, I think you're going to kind of sketch this out. And really be a powerful resource for this kind of philosophical renewal. So,
okay, thanks.
All right, anyone else? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. We're going to. I think we've got this recorded, and we're not going to share it publicly. We're going to share it with other donors that weren't able to be here. But I guess I'd also say if you have a friend who you think would be interested in supporting our work and wants to learn more about it, and you think this would be a helpful way of introducing them to it, let Marina know, and we can sort of share this recording on a case-by-case basis. So, Marina, I'll hand it back over to you to wrap up.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. As Brad mentioned earlier, we are planning to host these about quarterly. So we're expecting the next one to be sometime in early November, and we will let you know when we have a date selected for that. You probably won't be hearing from me because I'll be out on maternity leave, but you will hear from someone. So just stay tuned there. And then just as Brad mentioned, we are always looking to grow our network of supporters. So if you know anyone, is a friend, family, colleague, who you think would be interested in Davenant's work, please feel free to connect them with me or just mention them to me, and we can talk about the best way to get them involved. Besides that, you're welcome to reach out to me anytime. We're really happy to have you as part of Davenant's community, and I'd love to help you stay involved. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great evening.